Say this could be the single most formidable political ticket in my lifetime.
Meanwhile, in a remarkable development, Trump was also celebrating a major legal victory on Monday after the classified documents case against him was thrown out of court. In handing down her 93-page decision to dismiss the indictment, Judge Eileen Cannon said Special Counsel Jack Smith, who brought the case, wasn't properly appointed under federal law. She said Smith was an inferior officer prosecuting Trump, not a US attorney or an official confirmed by the Senate.
If the political branches wish to grant the Attorney General power to appoint Special Counsel Smith to investigate and prosecute this action with the full powers of a United States attorney, there is a valid means by which to do so.
Trump hailed the dismissal of what he said was a lawless indictment. In brief, Estonia's Prime Minister has resigned as she prepares to become the EU's new foreign policy chief. She will, however, remain in office until a new government is formed. And Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orbán has sent Ukraine peace proposals to EU leaders following his whirlwind trips to Kyiv, Moscow and Beijing. This has been Matt Boyland with your TNT News Brief. I'll be back with more at the top of the next hour.
This July, we're taking life seriously. Cardiac arrest is scary and more common than you might think. Did you know that every year nearly 9 million people will experience a cardiac event outside of hospital? Would you know what to do? I'm Australian actor Steve Bastoni, and I'm urging everyone to learn CPR as part of our Don't Die July campaign. Visit don'tdiejuly.com and sign up today, because you can't put a price on life.
From national security to global corruption, this is the Muckrakers on today's News Talk, TNT.
Well, hello and a very warm welcome back to the Muckrakers with me, Andrew Eborn. And here on the Muckrakers, we pledge to continue tackling the most pressing and controversial issues of our day, shining more light and less heat on the matters that really concern you. What I'm looking at today is going over to the US and what on earth is happening with the US presidential campaign. And it's more of a conversation than an interrogation of. I'm joined by my wonderful TNT co-hosts, James Friedman, looking wonderfully tanned, and Taylor Hudak. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Hello, Andrew.
Good to see you. Now, 2 days after surviving that appalling assassination attempt, an emotional Donald Trump appeared at the Republican National Convention in Milwaukee with a bandage on his ear, and he was greeted by a crowd shouting, "Fight!" The word he mouthed upon surviving the shooting. Earlier, Trump had nominated his vice presidential pick, which was Ohio Senator J.D. Vance, which sounds like a cheap sportswear store, doesn't it? But he was formally nominated as the GOP ticket for the presidential 2024 ticket. Now, we've looked at sort of J.D. Vance, and he's made all sorts of interesting comments about Trump beforehand. I think he said previously he wasn't a Trump fan. He himself is a venture capitalist turned Ohio senator. He rose to fame with his 2016 memoir, Hillbilly Elegy, I think it was, and he once described himself as a never-Trumper, calling the then candidate Donald Trump in 2016 an idiot, cultural heroine, and potential American Hitler. Horrendous language. What do you make of all of this, Taylor?
Yes, so we have so much news to cover now on the Republican side. And let me just say before I begin answering your question here, you know that Joe Biden has to be giving a huge sigh of relief that at least for this next week or two, perhaps the media is not so much focused on him and his mental capacities. But before I get into some of the policies or ideology of J.D. Vance, that is Trump's VP pick, I do want to talk about just briefly his history, his background. As you mentioned, Andrew, he does have quite an extraordinary life story that many would refer to as perhaps inspirational. So first of all, he's a very young man. He's only 39 years old. He will turn 40 in August. If Trump is elected in November, that would make J.D. Vance the third youngest vice president in United States history. And this is really interesting because it does really provide a contrast against Joe Biden, who is much older, 80 years old, who is also in a mental decline, and that has been much of the focus of the media the past few weeks. So you see a huge contrast here. Perhaps that also was a factor in former President Trump's decision to choose J.D. Vance, but he has a interesting background. After graduating high school, he enlisted in the U.S. Marine Corps, so he has experience in the military, which he says does shape some of his views on U.S. foreign policy. He graduated law school, in fact, from Yale Law School in 2013. He also has some connection to Peter Thiel, which we could get into. Some people are quite critical of this, and I think for a good reason. And he was also historically very anti-Trump, and then had sort of a flip and became very pro-Trump around 2020, 2021, when he ran for the Senate. But he did come from a very disadvantaged background. He struggled growing up. He came from a broken family and was able to build himself up to be this successful businessman, law school graduate from one of the best universities in the United States. Perhaps that can appeal to some voters, but what I've noticed, in fact, is that there are mixed reactions to this appointment. Some people do not view him as being anti-establishment enough, while others think he is a great choice, and they specifically look to some of his statements and policy ideas on the conflict in Ukraine. And we'll get into that shortly here, but those are just my introductory thoughts about who this man is. And I find his age in particular very interesting, as I said, against Joe Biden and Kamala Harris.
And I think his age has been a big issue in the sort of topic and discussion. And interestingly, if Trump were to be elected, and you know where my money is, if he were to be elected and then stepped aside during his presidency, then JD would be the youngest ever president. I think the youngest one before that was Teddy Roosevelt, who was 42 at the time. And the oldest, of course, was Joe Biden. What's your take, James?
Firstly, the name, Trump Vance. What a fantastic campaign name. Just like Advance, apart from Trump Vance. I think that's brilliant. Look, I think a lot of the pollsters, this election in the US later this year is going to be about the economy and immigration. And on the economy, a lot of the pollsters are saying it'll be won and lost in a handful of industrial Midwest battleground states and blue-collar swing states like Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. And given his backstory and the fact that he comes from humble sort of blue-collar background, I think it's a very, very smart choice by Trump, actually, because, Bidenomics, which is supposed to be the bottom up and middle out sort of alternative, according to Biden, to Trump's top down. But it hasn't really worked because obviously inflation has really hit the US economy over the past few years, and people haven't felt that boost from so-called Bidenomics. So I think this is a smart move from Trump.
I think you're right. If you look back at the 2016 campaign, and basically Trump chose Indiana Governor Mike Pence as the running mate, basically to appeal to the evangelical Christian voters, wasn't it, at that stage? Because Trump, by that stage, had already had a few marriages, and he thought that's the way to sway that particular electorate. But do you think, I want to go back to the comments that JD made about Trump, because people have always said Trump is not very forgiving. And we had comments being dug out by our David Lammy, the foreign secretary now, and what's going to happen there. But Trump seems to have forgiven him. What's your take on that, Taylor?
Yes, it is really interesting. Trump seems to be quite forgiving and very much willing to work with people who at one time had opposed him, which I think is a good quality to have in a leader, a political leader. But it does show that Trump, as I said, is quite trusting. So some of the things that J.D. Vance has said over the years before he flip-flopped on Trump was that he felt that Trump was somebody that the elites were correct about. He claimed to be a never Trump guy. He said, I never liked Trump. He can't stomach Trump. He thinks he's obnoxious and that he's leading the working class to a very dark place. So my question has been, and I think many others as well, is what caused him to flip-flop? And I think it's important to ask these questions, look at it objectively, and see if there's something there. Now, when I look at the state of Ohio and sort of the stats regarding the presidential election of 2016 and 2020, it's important to note that then candidate Donald Trump did win the state both times by a pretty significant majority, I would say. I think the second time around in 2020, it was somewhat close, about 500,000 votes between Joe Biden and Trump, with Trump being the victor in this. But I did wonder, perhaps, did J.D. Vance realize that pro-Trump candidates and candidates who are endorsed by Trump, they tend to do very well in the elections? If I look specifically at the stats here, let's look at the election year of 2020. This was around the time that J.D. Vance had his flip-flop. Trump endorsed a total of 188 candidates. 121 of them were primary endorsements, and the primary success rate, meaning the percentage of candidates who won who were endorsed by Trump, was 97%. So I do wonder if J.D. Vance took notice of this and realized that in order to survive politically and do well in this upcoming Senate race was to kind of get behind Trump. So I do question if this support for Trump at the time was authentic, or was it a political strategy?
Yeah, it is interesting. I heard J.D. Vance on the news today. Obviously, all of the journalists all over him, digging out these old quotes. And his excuse was, well, in 2016, I really didn't know Trump very well. It was leading up to this election, and those are my views then. I now saw what a brilliant president he was and what a brilliant president he's going to make in the future, and I changed my mind. And I also realized that the media, he blamed the media again, the media manipulates a particular image of Trump, and I'm not going to let them get away with it. What's your take on that, James?
Yeah, I do think there's question marks over why he flipped, and I think Taylor's probably onto something there, that it was just the practicalities of the political situation he was in. But look, 8 years ago this happened, which is a light year in politics, and particularly in US politics. So much has happened since 2016. So I think, we might see a bit of questioning at the start now, but I think it'll blow over. I don't think it'll have any impact whatsoever on the campaign.
Yeah, well, what's really clear is that Vance is very loyal to Trump. One of the first things he did, he blamed President Joe Biden for the assassination attempt on Trump, and all the sort of the rhetoric. We're going to come on to that a little bit later, which obviously contrasts sharply with Vice President Mike Pence, who sort of distanced himself on that sort of stuff. He's also got, I understand, got a close relationship with Trump's eldest son, Donald Jr., which is interesting. But I want to look at Vance's foreign policy, if you like, because he opposes US aid to Ukraine. And he says, look, rather similar to Trump, the focus should be on China as a greater threat. What's your take on that, Taylor?
Yes, this is a really important point to get into here, is the foreign policy ideology of J.D. Vance, because there is a lot to be, I guess, welcoming towards, because he is critical of the continued funding of this conflict in Ukraine. However, I was watching a presentation or speech that he gave, rather, at the Munich Security Conference in Germany. I think it was earlier this year. And he stated that Europe in particular needed to step up its security and deterrence measures to ensure peace in the region. He also went on to state that Germany had increased beyond 2% of its GDP on defense spending. And when he spoke about this, he seemed to welcome this idea and felt that more countries in Europe should be following suit. However, he said that this had to come at the great encouragement of the United States. Again, repeating previous comments he made that Europe doesn't take initiative in its own security. It relies too much on the US. I understand that point, but I think he is missing the larger point here, which is the fact that Europe has been forced into engaging and advancing this proxy war between the US and Ukraine. It's really not, I think, the European citizens in particular that wanted this to continue to advance. So while I think it is a positive development that he is against continued funding of Ukraine, has spoken out against getting further involved in this conflict, it seems that he also just wants to divert the foreign policy focus from Ukraine to East Asia, namely China and also Iran. And you can look to some of the comments and statements that he made just recently, I think yesterday, making statements that we need to go after Iran in a more tough manner. He also praised Trump's assassination of an Iranian general, Qasem Soleimani, back in January of 2020. He said that was a good move. It helped ensure peace in the region. These are all some questionable points that he had made. So I think that we need to be wary about his being good on Ukraine, but also wanting to initiate some conflict, perhaps with China and Iran, which would be, I think, catastrophic for the United States.
I know some excellent points. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to be digging a bit more into JD Vance and also see what the future might hold for the US. Come back after these messages.
I said, could she die? And the doctor said she could. It was so scary.
When I started clawing at my neck and trying to breathe, and I thought, what are we going to do if I die here? How's everyone going to go on?
When someone's gravely sick or injured in the bush, they rely on the Royal Flying Doctor Service. But now the Flying Doctor needs your help to fund vital medical equipment and supplies. Please search Flying Doctor online to give a regular gift of just $10. You can help equip the Flying Doctor's teams to respond to any emergency anywhere. Search Flying Doctor online. Become a part of the Royal Flying Doctor Service and help save lives in the bush.
A better business tip from TNT Radio. News Talk Radio listeners are some of the most active and involved listeners of any format. TNT Radio listeners rely on TNT Radio often as their primary source of information. They trust TNT Radio and are highly engaged with the content. If you'd like more information about advertising on TNT Radio, simply fill out your details on our contact page and we'll be in touch. To find out more, go to tntradio.live.
From national security to global corruption, this is the Muckrakers on today's News Talk, TNT.
Well, welcome back to the Muckrakers with me, Andrew Eborn, joined by James Freeman and the wonderful Taylor Hudak. Well, James is wonderful as well. And James, you wanted to come back.
Yeah, so on Ukraine, I think it's very, very welcome news that if Trump gets in, that he's going to try and tackle this proxy war and basically finish it off. Viktor Orban obviously has been very, very vocal on this recently. He's met with Xi Jinping and Putin and Trump, and he is confident that Trump will not wait to be inaugurated to sort this problem out. I think reading all of the press on this, it seems that the strategy they're going to use is basically a plan put forward by Keith Kellogg and Fred Fleets of the America First Policy Institute, which basically is going to propose that US continues to support Ukrainian defense, but the condition of that is that they have to sit down with Putin and enter talks essentially. And the other thing that's interesting is part of that plan is that Ukraine will need to cede Crimea and the Donbass border regions to Russia. So that's very, very welcome news, I think, especially for us here living in Europe. We do not need another war on our doorstep here. But I guess the more unsettling part of this is the fact that Vance is now talking about the pivot to China, because whilst we don't want a war in Europe, we also don't want a war with the second biggest economy in the world. Obviously, their military is growing. They're also a nuclear power. And, you know, they're also friends with Russia. So even if this conflict with Russia and Ukraine is sorted out, if we go to war with China, then I think there's going to be a lot of problems there. So, yeah, a mixed bag, really. Some good news, but some worrying news, I think, as well.
Yeah, and he's got some quite strong views, and we're all going to hear much more about J.D. Vance and all the things he says and all the things he regretted saying. I always make the point that everything you say, everything you do, every photograph has ever taken of you will come back at some stage to haunt you. So you've got to work on that basis. But Taylor, you were from Ohio. You knew about him in that sort of stage. What sort of light can you shed on the man?
Yes, I am from Ohio. However, complete opposite direction of the state from where Vance is from. And to go off of a point that you had made earlier in the discussion, James, I think strategically by choosing a VP from Ohio on Trump's decision to do this, I think does make a lot of sense because Ohio is a battleground state. It is a purple state. It can go either Democratic or Republican. However, in the past few elections, it has gone Republican, with the exception of some counties that you have the bigger cities like Cleveland, Columbus, Cincinnati, Toledo. Those tend to go more blue. But generally, the state has gone red for the past few election cycles. J.D. Vance is able to appeal to people in Middle America, the Midwest, the Rust Belt in particular, who are struggling economically, who are seeing their industry collapse, particularly in Ohio. I've seen this since I am from that state, where you have had destruction of the steel mills, which led to a lot of poverty, decrease in population. More people are leaving the state because there just isn't much opportunity. So I think by choosing a VP from this state, it gives people hope that people in this region of the country can be reached and will be heard. And historically, Trump has done quite well in the Midwestern states. So I think that it does make a lot of sense from Trump's perspective to choose this person. So those are my thoughts on that when you take a look at the state of Ohio.
No, I think you're absolutely right. And this is, I say, that the key about this is going for those states which are undecided. So, and his appeal, Vance's appeal, extends beyond Ohio. So battleground states, I think it's like
Sure.
Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. James?
Yeah, I just reiterate that really. I mean, that book that he wrote, Hillbilly Elegy, that is the backstory for many Americans in those battleground states. So, as I said, I think it's a very, very sensible choice for Trump, given the election dynamics we've got coming up. The other thing to mention about Vance is he's very much a MAGA man as well. He sponsored legislation in March that would cut Chinese government out of capital markets if it does not follow international trade laws, which is all about putting America first and putting China in its place. So, yeah, like I said, I think it's a very, very smart move by Trump.
Yeah, and there's some views which will come under the spotlight, and I think it's important that here on the Muckrakers we do shine a spotlight on those views. And some of his views are quite controversial. For example, about abortion, he's got a stricter anti-abortion than Trump. He basically opposes it, even in cases of rape or incest. What's your take on that, Taylor?
Yes, I think, in fact, the Republican Party is losing on this issue, and it's time to maybe rethink and come up with new policies surrounding this issue. I understand it's a very touchy subject, but the majority of people, especially younger people who lean towards the right, are in favor of allowing some abortions under some circumstances. So if the Republicans are really die hard on this issue, I think it does hurt the Republican Party. So it depends on what people weigh as being a more important factor when they go to the ballot box in November. But I do just want to bring up one aspect of J.D. Vance's career and his politics that has been the subject of quite a bit of scrutiny. I'm sure the listeners have heard about this, but it is worth noting in case you have not. And that is, of course, J.D. Vance's close connection to Peter Thiel, who is the founder of Palantir. Peter Thiel, in fact, donated $15 million to J.D. Vance's Senate campaign. Some people are raising this as an area of concern. Also, Thiel was instrumental in allowing for helping initiate the reconciliation between J.D. Vance and Trump, which is really interesting. And in addition to that, Thiel was on Trump's transition team after he won the election in 2016. So people are concerned about having Teal so closely connected to both of these candidates. Now, for just a little additional background on Palantir quickly here, it is, of course, a company which has collaborated with intelligence agencies like Mossad and the CIA. It has used artificial intelligence technology to target Palestinians in the Middle East. So there's a lot of concern about these close ties to this company, Palantir, and Peter Thiel. Also, another interesting bit of information that I came across was that Thiel and Vance have also invested in Rumble and fund a Roman Catholic app, Halo, which has been sponsoring many new media voices, which has had people wondering, okay, can these new media voices be able to hold to account J.D. Vance if they are being sponsored by a company that he is funding? So just some interesting questions that have been posed there, and something I wanted to point out to the viewers in case they haven't heard.
Oh, no, I think that's what we have to do. It's so new to a lot of people, J.D. Vance. We look at that. And the other thing he's aligned on, James, is tariffs and immigration. Basically advocates for broad-based tariffs and completing the border wall with Mexico. Remember, build that wall. He also opposes amnesty for illegal immigrants, which reflects Trump's views on these issues. What's your take on that, James?
Yeah, look, I think they are weak on the whole question about abortion. Trump's already been attacked from the Democrats on that. So if Vance is even harder than Trump on that, that is a potential weakness. But look, let's be clear. This election is going to be about the economy, about the money in people's pockets, and also immigration. I mean, I've just come back from holiday in the Caribbean, and I met loads of Americans there, mainly Democrats, but quite a few from New York. And a few of them told me that they were even considering voting for Trump because of what the immigration policy has done to cities like New York, which are sanctuary cities. Absolutely devastated New York, those policies have. And so really, really interesting to hear people saying that they might even hold their nose, even though they dislike Trump, they would actually consider voting for Biden because of these immigration policies. So I think in the big scheme of things, the abortion thing, it does lend a little bit of weakness to the Trump Vance campaign. But like I said, this election is going to be all about the economy and immigration.
Yeah, and it is interesting. We talked about J.D. Vance and the unfortunate words that he mentioned, which we're going to come back to haunt him. I mean, David Lammy, I mentioned him earlier. It's been coming out again now, further tweets from him where he was mocking Donald Trump as a snowflake. And he said previous US presidents have been assassinated. Now, the press are all over that at the moment. And obviously bringing that up to date with the horrendous events the last couple of days. And in 2018, you remember David Lammy, he launched several verbal attacks on the then President Trump. He said he was a woman-hating, neo-Nazi sympathizing sociopath. Trump has forgiven J.D. Vance. Do you think he's going to forgive Lammy? What's your take on that, Taylor?
Yes, perhaps he may. There have been so many politicians, people in the public eye who have said some pretty horrible things about Trump to then only go and change their mind and then even develop a relationship with Trump. In fact, I was really surprised to see at the Republican National Convention, they had a celebrity, Amber Rose, speaking. I was shocked to see her. She's quite well known in the United States, but she stated that at one time she was very anti-Trump. She felt that he was racist, sexist, and all of these other things. However, upon researching him further, she realized that none of that was true in her opinion. And so she decided to throw her support behind the president at that time. So you do see a lot of people who do make reversals. I also think in politics it's probably wise to embrace people who at one time disliked you because you would just want to welcome more people on your side. This is a game about popularity, really, at the end of the day, in winning votes and ensuring that the public is happy with your policies. So I think that it's something that Trump is used to. I also think that he does somewhat get a kick out of it and enjoys the challenge and is not hurt by statements or comments made by other people.
No, it's an excellent point. There's nothing more persuasive, I always say, than somebody who's a convert, a road to Damascus moment, which is what J.D. Vance claimed. What's your take, James?
Yeah, I think this is a big one for Trump, actually, particularly when you look at the lessons I think he should learn from his first term. Of course, he was famous for his name calling, very, very personal attacks on political opponents and people in the press, even. One of the things that I've kind of picked up in, more recently, there's less of that now. I mean, obviously there's the sleepy Joe Biden, but even that, he doesn't really bring that up that much anymore. So hopefully he's learned from that. But, this was a big weakness of the Trump first term. I mean, if we look at some of the appointments of people that resigned or were sacked, including National Security Advisor Michael Flynn, White House Chief of Staff Reince Priebus, a White House Communications Director Anthony Scaramucci. The list goes on and on and on. And so I think if there's lessons for him from that first term, it is his personal relationships, and potentially less name calling, I think, would be a good bit of advice for his advisors to give to him.
Yeah, I think that's right. The rhetoric is being turned down. And I think the getting Trump in the crossfire and all these things. And even Biden said, well, that's not what he meant. He said he's got to be in the bullseye. So we focus on Trump. He was apologetic about that. So turning down the rhetoric so we don't have these appalling attacks on politicians has got to be right. We were salivating at the weekend because Trump apparently met with Robert F. Kennedy Jr. And we thought that would have been an interesting announcement. What's your take on that, Taylor?
Yes, it absolutely would have been. And we were even speaking about this yesterday, that we were curious if he was going to pick RFK Jr. Now, there has been reports coming out, and I think they have been confirmed that RFK Jr. has been offered security services given the assassination attempt against Trump over the weekend. But just to go back to a few points brought up by James, I have noticed, and it's a good point you bring up, I have noticed that Trump has sort of dialed it back with regard to the name calling and some of the rhetoric that he used during the 2016 and 2020 campaigns. However, I think that some people did appreciate his boldness, his honesty, while many others did not. So I think it was an issue that divided a lot of people. People either loved it or they hated it, but he seems to have adopted a different tone. I agree with you on that. And if he does become president, say next year, I would hope for the sake of the United States and to ensure less chaos that there isn't some sort of rotating circus within his cabinet, which was certainly I think a stain on his early years as president in 2016 or 2017, 2018. So yes, interesting developments there to see Trump's evolving as a politician.
Yeah, and I think, going back to Kennedy, if Kennedy had been on the ticket, the point we were making is the comparisons with what happened with JFK and the recent assassination attempt would have been picked up very quickly by the electorate. What's your take on that, James?
Yeah, I do think that Trump has learned his lesson. I mean, his latest speech is all about unity, calling for national unity. So I would like to see Trump take a less divisive approach going forward. In terms of RFK, I have to say I was really disappointed that he didn't pick him. I think it would have been a very, very intelligent move, not least because RFK himself has got 12% of the vote. So presumably if he'd come on board with Trump, I should imagine a lot of that 12% would have shifted straight to the Trump campaign. So I think it's a missed opportunity. But of course, there were a lot of problematic there would have been a lot of problematic issues for Trump, not least the accusations of RFK of being an anti-vaxxer. Not that we think he is here on TNT, but of course that would have been used by the Biden campaign and some other sort of more problematic policy approaches of RFK as well. So I think for those reasons, probably it is the right decision because I think it would have opened up attack lines for the Democrats. But I can't say I'm not disappointed. It would have livened things up a lot, I think.
No, I think undoubtedly. I want to look at some of the cases against Trump because he's getting a few victories. Florida-based U.S. District Judge Eileen Cannon has dismissed the criminal case against Donald Trump of illegally holding on to classified documents. Now, this is interesting, and there's been all sorts of developments on the criminal cases there. What's your take on that, Taylor?
Yes, this is very interesting. When I learned of this news yesterday, I was very surprised by it, and the media was reporting that this is quite an unexpected development. So the story is that the classified documents case against Trump has been completely thrown out on a specific technicality, which I'll get to in a second. But just for some background information, Trump was accused of keeping classified documents in his Florida home after completing his first term in office in August of 2022. Many will remember the FBI raided Trump's home. September of 2023, federal grand jury indicted Trump for the mishandling of classified documents. He pled not guilty to this charge, stating that it was within his authority to declassify the documents, or he had the declassification authority. And now the judge who was overseeing the case, Judge Eileen Cannon, she dismissed this case against Trump on an issue regarding the appointment of Jack Smith as the special counsel. There was a 93-page document that was released yesterday. She stated that the appointment of Jack Smith violated the appropriations clause or appointments clause of the U.S. Constitution. But I'm still surprised, though, that it was this that caused her to completely throw the case out of court. I thought that was interesting. Typically, what would happen is that the president would appoint, or the current U.S. government would appoint the special counsel, and then that special counsel would have to then be approved by the Senate. However, the DOJ appointed the special counsel, and he was not approved by the Senate. Now, the reason the DOJ stepped in was because of a potential conflict of interest, given the election coming up. So it is a very interesting development. However, there is still a pending case against Trump, which is with regard to the election results of 2020, denying the election results of 2020. So there's still some illegal case against him, but it is a little bit concerning when you look at the broader scope of everything. Trump was attacked in the media, slandered, criticized, and I think there is oftentimes very good reason to criticize his policies. However, that didn't really work. He still maintained his popularity. Then he was hit with lawfare, many lawsuits. That really didn't work to deter from people supporting him. And then there was an assassination attempt made against him. So you see the progression of attacks on Trump. It is very concerning. Whether or not you like Trump or support his policies or support him as president, we all need to look at this and say, this is not how democratic institutions should operate.
And it's interesting. I often make the point that the more they throw at Trump, the more his popularity increases. And I dug out a glorious old paper when he got arrested this time. Here we go. You remember that one? Where he was basically inmate number PO 1135809. There you go. Have a look at that. And basically, he then turned that into mugs and things like that, and raised millions for his campaign as a result of it. So interesting stuff. But just to deal with those cases, I mean, it's likely that the Jack Smith being improperly appointed, it's expected there's going to be an appeal for that, but that will take some time. There was the federal election case, which is basically pertains to Trump trying to overturn the 2020 election, and that's on hold, basically due to the Supreme Court ruling that Trump can't be charged for official acts as president. And there's obviously going to be a debate about what's official and what's not. We've got the hush money case where there were 34 felony counts related to the 2016 election, hush money payments, remember, to Stormy Daniels. Sentencing's been delayed until September, and basically following Trump's challenge based on Supreme Court's immunity ruling. And all sorts of things were thrown into that trial about his relationship with Stormy Daniels, and it was gruesome details, which were completely unnecessary because it's to do with record keeping and so on and so forth. And perhaps one of the most serious ones of all is the Georgia election case, which involved Trump trying to overturn the 2020 election. And that's currently on pause as appeal courts consider disqualifying Fulton County DA Fannie Willis and the arguments are scheduled for October, just to put all of those into context. What's your take on all the different legal things against Trump, James?
Yeah, there's definitely been a lot of lawfare. I mean, that New York case for fraud, what a joke that was. I mean, I've never heard of a fraud case where nobody's been defrauded. And of course, there was no jury in that case as well, some special law there in New York. So that was a bit of a joke. And I think, you know, there is a lot of that going on. The Stormy Daniels case, I mean, the press constantly quote 34 felons when actually it's just one. There were 34 bills. That's all that he put forward. And to be honest with you, even though that case, he's ended up getting a felony for that, in reality, it was a pretty novel way of constructing the case against him, because the actual act of making those payments is a misdemeanor. You would normally get a slap on the wrist, but of course they used it in a novel way to say that he was committing election fraud by misleading voters, which I think is a little bit of a reach. But saying all of that, I think the real one which could damage him, which is very, very unlikely to become to court before the election, but is this one in Georgia with the leaked phone call with the former president asking the state's top election official to find 11,780 votes. I mean, that's pretty bad. And it's pretty difficult to argue anything other than that if you've been recorded on a phone call saying that. But for Trump, I guess the positive is it's not going to come before the November election. And if he becomes president, well, he can just pardon himself.
Well, yes, I think that's a glorious prospect indeed. And as you say, well, actually, there are arguments for each side, and we'll listen to those arguments with interest. We're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to have the latest on the assassination attempt. Don't go.
The challenges our planet's animals are facing sometimes feel a bit heavy.
The animals haven't eaten in a day, 2 days. They haven't drank anything. They're cold. They're dehydrated.
As soon as we started our descent, everywhere I could see was mud. Just absolutely mud.
The country has been in prolonged drought for so long. It was like a tinderbox waiting to go up.
Okay, very heavy. Each of us wants to be part of the solution, and we can be. Remember that there's good happening right now. At home.
All right, we were able to get into your unit, and we have all 4 of your cats. So,
okay.
And around the world. For any animal in any disaster. So let's focus on that, right? Be part of the solution, one rescue at a time. Search ifa.org/disaster ready.
The impact of a meal goes well beyond feeding our bodies. Because when people are fed, futures are nourished. Everyone deserves to live a full life. And with your help, together we can end hunger. Join the movement at feedingamerica.org/act now.
Tracking global corruption and threats that undermine our security. This is the Muckrakers on today's News Talk, TNT.
Well, welcome back to the Muckrakers with me, Andrew Eborn, James Freeman, and Taylor Hudak. And we've been looking at what's all the stuff going on in America. And I want to touch on the appalling assassination attempt on the 13th of July at the Republican Party presumptive nominee in the 2024 election, as he then was. He is now the nominee. He was shot in the right ear at a campaign rally near Butler, Pennsylvania. And looking at all the footage, it was inches, I mean, less than centimeters away. Absolutely appalling thing. Trump himself was basically very bullish about it afterwards. He was sort of wanted to stand out there saying, fight, fight, fight. And he posted on his own Truth Social on the 14th of July. I'll just read it to you. Thank you to everybody for your thoughts and prayers yesterday, as it was God alone who prevented the unthinkable from happening. We will fear not, but instead remain resilient in our faith and defiant in the face of wickedness. Our love goes out to the other victims and their families. We pray for the recovery of those who were wounded and hold in our hearts the memory of the citizen who was so horribly killed. In this moment, it is more important than ever that we stand united and show our true character as Americans, remaining strong and determined and not allowing evil to win. I truly love our country and love you all, and look forward to speaking to our great nation this week from Wisconsin. DJT. And interesting, rather than retweeting it, you retruthed it, which I hadn't realized before, but that's on his Truth Social network. Is there any more information we have on this, Taylor?
Yes, there has been some additional information that has surfaced. And let me just say that it is all very unusual. I understand that the public sentiment right now is just one of confusion and wanting more answers. However, the more information we receive, it seems people are left more confused. But the FBI is investigating this assassination attempt as a potential act of domestic terrorism. For quite some time, it seems that the FBI was struggling to gain access to the shooter's phone, which is honestly quite remarkable that the FBI struggled to do so. However, they were eventually able to gain access after an FBI specialist technician got into the phone. And from my last update on this or research into this just before the program, I don't think that anything of substance was found on the phone. And also, interestingly, this young man, the shooter, did not have any social media presence that we know of or that's been reported on. It's very, very strange for someone who was willing to be incarcerated for life, receive the death penalty, or die for his political views or for a political cause, wasn't active on social media and didn't seem to be someone who was a well-known politically active person. But the FBI authorities did search his vehicle and his home. They found 2 explosive devices. They also found that there were several packages delivered to him that contained hazardous material. Perhaps this was to assemble these explosive devices. But I know we don't have too much